Hi there, it's Ike LaFontaine. I'm sitting in front of the X32 board at the front of house position here at Literal Life Church, where I go to church. And our musicians have just recently, in the last few months, got the new Power Play, the P16Ms, which is the in-ear monitor system where they have their own control. This is their own mixer up front. And the musicians, some of them are struggling to kind of get an idea of how to get the mix that they want. So they wanted me to do a little bit of a tutorial on their mixes. So let's do a quick little recap of the history of the monitor mix a little bit. It used to be just the front of house position, the guy on the mixer in the middle of the room or in the back of the room that was trying to mix the monitor mix for the band members. And the band members would say, you know, they'd point at the monitor and say, I need to hear more of the guitar, and then he'd turn the guitar up, and this vocalist would say, I need to hear more of that vocalist, and so they would turn that up on the monitors. Then they started going with a second console where they'd have a front of house position here, and then they would have a monitor mixer that would sit off the side of the stage, and that monitor mixer would have a stage wedge, maybe a couple monitors, some headphones, and they would, you know, the band would look over at him when something was not right, and he would look into it. You know, he'd put the headphones on, or he'd turn that solo that mix in one of the wedges, and he would listen to exactly what they're hearing there. And he was also within kind of screaming distance or yelling distance to say, hey, you know, turn this guy up or down. And then Aviom was the first ones that kind of started to get into providing these little personal mixers where they could dial in exactly what they want to hear through either their stage wedge. It's got a line out on here, so it could come out of here straight into a wedge monitor, or it could come out of here into headphones or in-ear monitors. So, man, you think that's fantastic. Now the front of house guy doesn't have to worry about it. The band members can get exactly what they want. It's almost like having a mixer right in front of you. The functions are almost unlimited on this thing. It's crazy how much you can dial in your mix here. That's a pro. It's also a con, though, because the front of house guy sits around all day thinking about EQing things and compressing and limiting and side chain limiters and multi-band compression and EQ and things like that. Band members don't usually spend the time in that. So you've got a bunch of band members who are not sound men, and then you hand this to them or you put it in front of them and say, here, now you do your own mix. So my band members at my church have asked me to do a little bit of a tutorial to help you understand this a little bit. So let's do that really quick. I'm going to introduce this really quickly. It's a fantastic little unit. I absolutely love in-ear monitor systems because I take the time to learn it. And I'm a sound guy, so for musicians, there's a little bit of a learning curve here, and you've got to be patient with yourself. You've got to give yourself time. The sound man usually will assign all of these buttons, and you put a little piece of strip of tape down here, which is what I did, and you label them. So let's see what I got here. Preacher down here, and I don't know if this is backwards for you guys or not, but across the bottom there's 16 buttons down here, okay? And they are all labeled. I got vocals, I got crowd mics in there. I always like to put crowd mics in here because one of the complaints is that they feel like when they get in the inner monitors is they feel like they're isolated, they can't feel the room. Musicians like to feel, really good musicians like to feel the room. They like to feel atmospherically what's happening, especially church musicians, because they have to follow the spirit of what's happening. And if you can't sense what's happening in the room, it kind of makes you a little too sterilized from everything that's happening, and you're just playing the instrument to be playing the instrument. You want to feel the atmosphere of the room. So I always put crowd mics in my mixes all the time, so I can feel the room, I can feel it breathe a little bit, and I always give it to the instruments, give it to the monitors that are in the in-ear monitor system here. I don't bring it back through the front of house, through the speakers, but it always goes into headphone mixes, into recordings, and sometimes like into the mix out in the nursery and the foyer and places like that where people can hear that the service is lively or that the people are lively in the room. So this is a selectable button. So when you push these, they will light up. They'll turn red. Okay, so these are all setup buttons. We're going to hold off on those for right now. We're not going to talk about those. But for right now, if you take a peek at this over here, this main button, if you push the main button, and then you take the knob over here, this is your volume knob, and it's going to be your volume knob for everything you push. So if I push the guitar player or the bass player or the drums down here, and I turn that up, and you'll see these lights light up across here, okay? So keep this in mind. If you push main, then these are disabled at that point. They're we're not talking about an individual. You're talking about the main overall volume. Click it, turn it up, it turns the main volume up. And then this is also another output up here, okay, for outputs. This is your main level out for everything. It's like a master volume. It would be the same thing as a master fader that we have on the slider. That would be a master fader for everything. This is your master fader for what you're hearing come into there. Now you can crank this thing up, and then next to it here it has a kind of a limiter. So what this does, it's a little bit of a compressor slash limiter, and what it does is you set this, if you want it to be heard loud, like for instance, let's say you've got a band that plays with a lot of dynamics. Sometimes they're playing softly, sometimes they're playing loud, and that's exactly the band that I've got. They can get really loud, and then they can break down and get really soft. And if you do that, then sometimes you want to push the level up high. Okay, you want to push the levels up on these when you're on this main, and then you want to limit it back a little bit, because when it gets loud, you want it to hold the back a little bit, or else you'll hurt your ears. And you definitely do not want to hurt your ears. A huge risk here of putting things in your ears is that you can damage your hearing. You do not want to do that. So set the volume nice and loud so that when it gets soft, it's comfortable, you can hear everything, it doesn't all drop away on you. But then when they start to get loud, then the limiter starts to kick in. And this limiter, when you got it engaged, when you're looking at it, you'll see there's a little red light around the bottom of it, around the knob, and you'll see the limiter kicking in. It's fantastic how that works. And they did, man, I think they just did a great job of designing this thing. So now let's run across these real quick. So you've got main, and then you control that main with the volume right here. You can also hit main, and you can pan. This button right here is a pan button, and pan means left and right. It's a pan pot that in the old days they used to call them, and you can turn it, put it in the left ear or the right ear. And the great thing about this is, say you have two guitarists, and you want to kind of keep them from meshing and running it into each other too much. You could click one guitar and push him over to the right, and put the other guitar and push her over to the left. Okay? And it's a great way to separate the mix out a little bit. It's a great way to fan out your vocals in your mix if you want to. You know, if you've got 5 vocalists, let's say you had 6 vocalists over here, and you could just kind of say, I want this one all the way to the right, and then I want this one just a little bit, and this one a little bit, this one in the middle, and then 3 off over on that side too. So you can pan people out to kind of stretch the mix out and make it sound really, really nice. So that's a great way to do that. So again, main mix, you're disabling these here. Now, if you want to just solo and listen to one track, let's say you're hearing a buzz and you're like, what is that buzz? I can't stand that noise. Hit solo, and then go through these, each one, and listen to each track. And when you find the buzz, then go, hey, Ralph, your guitar amp is buzzing, or whatever. So you can do that way. You've also got a mute button. Let's say there's no reason in the world where I need to hear the organ. The organist does his own thing, and I'm a whatever player, and for some reason you don't want to hear. Don't do it because you're angry at somebody, but do it because for the purposes of this. It's good to be able to hear everything, but if you ever do need to mute something, you can click on the mute and then select the button to mute, and it'll mute it. And then you can go back to your main mix and then back out into the individual. So you're not going to use these a whole lot, I don't think, unless you just have to get rid of a noisy something, or you don't want to hear a certain something. Okay, so let's get into this. So we're only dealing with the bottom half of this right now. Don't worry about these top ones right now. So these are the select buttons. I select it. I decide whether I want it in my left ear or right ear, and I turn the volume up to an acceptable level for that instrument, whatever I want to hear. Okay, that's simple. Main, then I start selecting, and then I go, okay, here's the flute. I want to turn the flute on, and I want the flute to come only out of my left ear. So I dial it over here a little bit, or just move it off to the left a little bit, and then I'm hearing too much flute, I'm going to back the flute down a little bit. And see this triangle right there? You'll see the red lights will light up all the way to the top and down. So what you probably want to start with to start a mix out is do exactly what a sound man would do when he sits in front of a board for the first time. when a sound man sets up a sound system, one of the first things he does after everything gets kind of plugged in and everything like that, he's going to do something called gain staging. And that is where he's going to set up the controls for how much sound he's going to let into the board. Okay? So you got to be thinking about this a little bit strategically. I know that I'm playing an instrument, and I know I want to be able to hear myself really good. To be able to play well, I want to hear myself good. Now, I want to hear everybody else too, but I want myself in my mix to be a little bit louder than everybody else, or at least a little bit more present than everybody else, so that I can hear what I'm doing and make sure my performance is where it should be. I don't want it to be the only thing I hear. Definitely not, because you've got to play with the other musicians and hear everything that's going on. So if you keep that in mind, you understand that you're going to be setting gains. As you begin to set up your thing, you want to set up your gain or set up your volumes in here to be where once you get to your instrument and you begin to dial in your instrument, you haven't turned everything else up so loud that you don't have any headroom to push yourself on top of them. Okay? So the first thing I always like to do is let's set the gain staging before we get started. First thing you do out of the box, get this thing and start going through the instruments, everything but your own instrument. Keep your instrument off for right now and start going through these, but start with your main, click main, crank it all the way up. Make sure it's not muted. If you push this button right here, it mutes it. Okay, it's another mute button. But push the main and turn this one all the way up, and then turn this one up a healthy way. Don't worry about this right now. Get these things nice and high, because what we're going to do is we're going to set these volumes. Now, you don't want to hurt your ears, but you're going to be setting the volumes of these things in a higher gain staging thing. That way you can kind of back it down when it comes time, and you've got headroom. You've set everything in a high level so that so you're not pushing each individual track high. You're basically having to put a little bit of flute in, a little bit of bass in, a little bit of drums in, a little bit of piano in, so that you can hear yourself, but it's still loud for you to listen to. And then when you put yourself in, you can back the volume back down, you can put yourself in, and you can dip yourself, you can give yourself a little bit more headroom on it, okay? And that way it gives you room. The mix is all happening down here in the first three little lights down in this area, and then you can set your mix up afterwards. That's how I set up gain staging on these things. So remember, positive and negative is that positive is you get your own mix. Great, guys, here you go. Here's your own mix. The negative is there's this tremendous learning curve to learn EQ, compression, limiting, you know what I mean, panning left and right, and you're turning your musicians into sound men and sound women. So there's a little bit of a learning curve here. So start with gain staging. Set this thing up this way. Main, crank it up, okay? Get your mains nice and high, and then keep your limiter back down by 50% or something like that, or just you don't want it to have to be limiting too much. And then start setting everybody else up by your instrument. I want to pan him over here. I want to go through each instrument. Let him play. Get people playing in rehearsal. Go through all that stuff. And then once you're done with all of that, then you can go through and do that. Now that's just the bottom half of this. That's the level. Now let's go up here for a minute. This is the great thing, is I can select. Let's say you got the bass in there and it's just going. You're getting all this low end frequency on the bass. Boom, 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 boom. It's all low. You can select the bass down here. And it's not always just an up or down thing. Sometimes it's a frequency. So look what you have here. This is so fantastic. You've got bass, mid-level. So bass, to give you an idea, low end is the bass stuff. It's all the boom, 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 sub-range, low frequency stuff. Lower, a lot of times lower than some of the average human voices even go, is all down in the low end here. Then you've got mid-range, which is all guitars, vocals. A lot of those things occupy the same frequency ranges in the middle there. It's all the all this mid-range stuff where we talk, where we sing a lot of times is all in here. And then you've got high frequencies over here. Notice I skipped a button here. I'm going to show you that in a minute. This high frequency over here is all the hello, all the S's, all the really high instruments and high things, cymbals crashing, and really high notes on the organ maybe, and things like that are up here, okay? So low, mid, and high. And then you've got this, what I love about this thing is that it's got this frequency, it says frequency underneath there. And it's this, they used to call this a sweepable mid back in the old days. And what it's great for is you set your bass volume, like let's say you do your bass guitar and you've got this, it's really boom, 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 boom. So you just back off on the bass a little bit. First select it, okay? So back off on the bass a little bit. Set your volume where you want it. It's like, oh, that sounds pretty good. But I want it to be more present. It seems like when I drop the bass out, then I kind of lose the whole low end of things and I lose the bass a little bit. And I want to push that a little bit. And you start to push up on this mid frequency a little bit and it gets gargling. The great thing is this frequency knob right here will sweep around. If I go down here, I'm sweeping down closer to the low stuff. If I sweep up here in the middle, it's right where I'm talking probably right now, and a little higher like in here, and it gets up and then it takes over from the high frequencies over. So I can, if I want the bass to have a little bit of boom, 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 that kind of popping stuff, that kind of, you know, real throaty gargle, you know, something that to make it pop out, I can crank up the mid a little bit and then I can sweep around until I find that frequency I like that's popping. And if it gets muddy and stuff like that, then you don't want it. That's probably down in here somewhere. And if you want a little bit more of it, you can do that. There's all kinds of different things you can do. Let's say you've got a vocalist and she sounds a little shrill or something like that when she's singing her song, then you can turn down the mid frequency and you can sweep around until it takes out the shrillness. Sweep back and forth and you might find her right in there and say, oh, okay, now that, you turned it down and then you found the frequency that was bad, and when you hit the frequency, it's turning it down. And there's a great way to illustrate this, and hopefully I'll do that when I do a video on EQ. I know this video is already getting long because there's a tremendous amount of learning that goes into this. So keep in mind that you can do that. So these are the frequency buttons here. This is mixing your frequencies. So once you've set your volumes a little bit, now you can go back through and start selecting. Select, how does it sound? How can I sweeten the sound a little bit with my frequencies? I'll back off a little bit on the highs and I'll sweep the mid around a little bit. I'll turn the mid down and then I'll sweep around and see what dips out, what bad frequencies dip out of there. Or I'll turn the mid up and then I'll sweep back and forth to find out what I like about it. You can do that. That's a sweepable mid with a mid-range knob right there. And then low-end frequencies, if it's a lot of vocals, you may not use very much the low-end frequency at all. You probably won't even have to worry too much about this on guitars and vocals, because most of the human vocals, unless they're a bass vocalist or a lower vocalist, are not going to come into play down here anyway. So you're not going to be touching frequencies that exist down here unless they go, the P-popping into the microphone or something like that. So that's the equalization stage. You can select and EQ perfectly. So by this time, if you set your gains high, and then you've gone through and kind of set your volumes the way you want them, and then you've gone through and you started to sweeten all the EQs on these, and you get it where you want it. Now you're ready to add yourself in, to EQ yourself, get yourself at your right volume. Then you can back off on the masters a little bit, select main, and you can back it down, or you can just back it down right here with this main output, the main fader there. You can put in some limiting, so you can back the volumes way back off a little bit, so you're just hearing comfortably in your ears. You're hearing it comfortably, and then you have everybody play out wild and crazy, the loudest they're going to get, and you can set your limiter volume. So if I wanted to limit just the drum set, I would have to go to the drum set, select it down here, and then go into the limiter, and I can back the drums off a little bit if they're being a little bit harsh or something. So you can have everybody play really softly and crank the levels up where you're comfortable, where you can hear everybody, and then you have everybody play really loud and then engage this limiter when they get at where it's loud in your headphones, where you don't want it to get it past that point. You can set this level here, this limiter, where it will engage when things get really loud, and that way it kind of self-mixes at that point. You don't have to worry about it anymore. So if you're playing something soft, the limiter stops being engaged. It doesn't engage in anything, and you can hear fine. And then when people start getting loud, the limiter starts going, okay, that's enough. I don't want it to get above this certain level. and that's what limiters are so great for. So hopefully that's really helpful to you guys. I could go more in depth with it, do some examples. The great thing about this too is that you've got outputs for headphones, where you can use headphones. I think I said this earlier. You can use headphones, or you can come out of here and go into a stage wedge. Good. The only thing to worry about when you got wedges happening, when you're coming out of a mono out, or you're coming out of stereo out and you're going into stage wedges, the only thing to worry about is you can have feedback happen from this mix. Okay, so in other words, if I'm sitting at a piano and I've got a boom mic on me and I've got a stage wedge down here and I'm mixing my own mix here, if I want to hear more of myself and I select myself and start cranking the volume up, my mic is susceptible to feedback through the wedge. So you got to be careful of that if you've got an open speaker. You don't have to worry about it if it's in your ears too much, but if it's a wedge, you want to definitely be careful with that. And what a sound man would do in that situation is not just turn it down. The sound man would induce a little bit of feedback, cause it to happen a little bit, not during a service, but while you're rehearsing, cause the feedback to start to happen, and then go to this mid frequency guy, turn the mid down a little bit, like this, about a quarter down, and then start sweeping around until you find when it finds that frequency that's ringing, it'll just go away because it dips it out. You found the frequency and you're already dipping it. See? Isn't that great? And then your feedback goes away. All right, I hope this was helpful. I talked a lot longer than what I thought I would. I hope it's helpful for our guys and girls here at Literal Life, and I hope it's also helpful at your church. And we have a lot more videos. We've been working feverishly getting videos ready, and there's more of that to come too, on training on digital mixers and training in sound, training in piano playing and all kinds of things. So more of those things will be to come. We're all doing that all through the LaFontaine Foundation. I ask you to please support the LaFontaine Foundation. We're going to be doing instructional videos. We're going to be doing just a lot of things, and offering them along with musical instruments and sound systems for churches in the Philippines. And the Lord has got a lot of things for us to do, and we like to use music to open the door, to reach out to people. It's a great bait on the hook to get people interested in listening so that they can be blessed, and so that they can accept Christ and use their musical gifts for Him, and the sound system gifts too. And now all of you musicians are going to be sound men and women as well. So congratulations. That was the P16, the Power Play by Behringer, and highly recommend it. It really works well for us, and it's a great board. The X32 is a fantastic unit for churches. It's been just really, really super helpful. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.